Hey everyone, welcome back to CyberSecurityTV. Last week we talked about the cross-site scripting and how can we bypass our application firewall by using certain payloads. This week we're gonna focus on this SQL injection. I'm gonna show you some techniques, some payloads. If you detect WAF and let's say, ideally, we most likely ask clients to disable the WAF during the course of the penetration test. But just in case if they are unable to or you're not able to request that, these are some of the payloads that you can use to bypass the application firewall. And of course, please hit the thumbs up button if you haven't already and subscribe to my channel for the weekly episodes. Now let's get into it. So first one we're gonna talk about is the blind SQL injection. Now typically when I test for the SQL injection or the blind SQL injection, we usually use payload like this single quote or one is equal to one. And usually if there is one, maybe sometimes if it's some error message that we see, or maybe sometime it's like the response, how the application responds based on time, or maybe based on the data, we can figure out if the our payload is actually being processed. More often than not, these payloads are usually one of the most basic payload, which are used by every scanners and every scripts like a SQL map. So this is blocked by the WAF by default. Instead, like minor tweak to it might do the trick. So for example, instead of using number one, you can use some random numbers like we have shown here, like number nine, right, or 876, whatever you want to use. So just don't use like the same generic payloads which you can find on any website. Then you can also use like ASCII characters instead of using the letters by itself. You can convert them to the ASCII, and then you can use that as a payload, and maybe that will do the trick. You can also use like a decimal value, and that this one character of 32 is typically a null value, and then you compare it with null, and then based on that you can also do that, and or you can also say like or 9 is not a null. Now if you look at the SQL map and some of the payloads that they're using, they also have a firewall detection, and then also prevent the avoidance or uh, bypass payloads, and some of these payloads you can also find from their database as well. So these are some basic things. When you're doing the pen testing, don't just use script alert script like we saw last time, because that's very basic. If you know the firewall is not in use, or they have been disabled, of course you can go ahead and do that to test the application control. But if you're not certain, then probably don't use that basic payloads. Use this one. Now the next one, usually what during the pen test we do is we try to do the union select, right? To get That's the goal of the SQL injection, to gather as much information as we can as an attacker from the database. So usually I would use id is equal to 1, and then I'll append like union select 1 2 3, and then estimate or guess the number of columns, and then based on that I can gather the data. Now this is again very basic, and you can find this on the OWASP as well, a cheat sheet that you can use this payload. But again, this is very basic payload, again will be blocked by the WAF. So what you might want to use instead is use this characters like backslash and star. You can also replace it with pound signs, or maybe insert like a null characters to avoid the WAF. So usually this kind of attack will work when WAF is just taking out the dangerous traffic and still let the good traffic pass through the application. This will not work if the attack is entirely blocked. So there are also multiple rules in WAF depending on how it's configured. Sometimes the rules are more permissive, where it will filter out all the bad traffic and let the good traffic pass through. So what happen in this case is this particular query or payloads will become like this, and which will eventually be able to maybe we'll see if the application be able to execute, or be able to reach to the database or not. And one other thing is, do not use union select. You can, at least what you can do during the pen test is just use union all select. because typically sometimes this is not something I've seen like blocked by the web application firewall as well. Of course, there are different version of WAF. There are so many different types of WAF, different rules. So you'll have to do trial and error and see which one works. But union all select is much better option than using union select 123. The next one, you can also like try different bypasses, change the character case, right? Like you can use like multiple upper and lower cases, and then that's a good variant you can use. The other one you can also do is you can replace the keyword and maybe like insert some special characters. Like here we can see we have added like ampersand NBSP, so that will also be removed by the WAF, and then it can process like like a usual query. Here you can see we can also do like select, but then also enter a select in between, which might work because when the WAF is trying to normalize the traffic request. uh, this one is we are trying to enter like we are doing the URL encoded. So many times we have tried in even within the cross-site scripting is we encode the payload and then pass it on. So here we are going to do the same thing. We're gonna encode our payload and then pass it through. So WAF does not detect any malicious character and then let it go. And here we are just using hexadecimal, and the last one is the union encoding. This one is quite interesting. I think a couple of weeks ago we saw how the union encoding can be used to disguise not just the human but also the application controls as well, because these are very lookalike characters, but these have very different ASCII values. So this is also sometimes it's possible to bypass the WAF controls if you're using the same techniques which we discussed like few weeks ago for phishing as well as the SQL injection bypass. The other techniques we can use is the HTTP parameter pollution. Now, I'm not going to discuss what is the parameter pollution. We have already discussed that in the previous video, which is linked here in the description as well. But you can use that parameter pollution to actually bypass the WAF. So ideally, how the pollution query would work is you define ID is equal to 1, then select 1, 2, 3 from users where ID is equal to 1, right? So you're polluting the parameter by assigning multiple values, and in the end, you hope that the backend will get confused. So what we can do is we can instead of that we can do like ID is equal to 1, select 1 plus and ID is equal to 2, and then also continue our query like that. Or you can also insert these characters like ID and then select and then again ID and then password. So this will be called union select password from users, right? So ultimately the WAF will not be able to recognize the ID parameters, and ultimately when the application collects the input from the user, it's gonna collect all of them together and form one query which will be executed from the in the database. So this is like of course every web server will react differently based on our input, but these are some of the basic techniques which you can use while you are pen testing to find your SQL injection, and especially when you detect the WAF is in place. So hopefully this is helpful for you. If you know any other techniques, please feel free to share with me and to our community. I think that will be very much useful. If you have any other ideas, let me know as well. But yeah, thank you for your time. Let me know in your comment what you feel about this video, and if you have any questions. I'll see you guys next Monday.